Hey guys, and welcome to another week of world building. Well, this week I'm sculpting this crazy guy here. I thought I'd just begin this series, sort of like a hobby vlog series, I guess, but related to my Blight of Gods brand, and bring you in on the process of how I create the world and all the characters and everything that goes along with it. It's kind of like I guess, something that you don't always see. Most companies will hide most of this development and you don't get to see it, or if they do, they'll bring it out in like a book or something years later or whatever. But I figured, since I'm just a sole artist and all that kind of stuff, doing this on my own, I figure I may as well bring you in on the process because it's pretty interesting. So a little bit like my hobby vlog series that I do for Warhammer, but related to Blight of Gods. So yeah, this week it's all about this character here. So he's for a new faction. I won't go into too much about that just yet, but essentially I'm in the process of making a second deck for my card game. So the first one was Cursed Blood, and now the second one, which the current title is Rivals, which is going to have a whole new range of factions, and this being one of them. So they're kind of like I guess, sort of maybe a little bit Egyptian inspired, African inspired, yeah, sort of blend of some ancient cultures, and obviously all the necromancy stuff and all my lovely organic bone shapes that I like to do. So yeah, I figured I'd just bring you on this, and I'll start sculpting, and we can have a little chat about what's been happening this week, and I suppose the trials and tribulations of trying to get something as big as this kind of project done as like one person. It's pretty much yeah, it's a mammoth job. So I've been like doing this now for, God, I don't know, it's been like, I guess this is like the seventh or eighth year of building this. And yeah, it's been a journey, I can tell you. In the early days, it was like just trying to learn this program, which is ZBrush. That's the program I'm using to, made by Pixelogic, which I'm using to sculpt all this with. And, it's that has its own issues, right? So you you need to sort of get over that hurdle, and just sculpting generally, like your basic skills as well for understanding like form language and all of the rest. That's just like a huge deal in and of itself that takes years to master. And so I guess the journey for this brand was like years before that, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 years before that, just learning how to approach this type of thing. And that's always, if you're interested in kind of building your own stuff and adding it in for like tabletop, or as this one is card game, or as some of my stuff is for like, or will be anyway, board games and things like that, or those kinds of projects, whatever it might be. Yeah, there's like a lot of additional skills and stuff you have to really, get your head around before you can begin really producing anything. That's like even before it all starts, and you might think you've got a cool idea or whatever, but if you don't have the skills to execute it, it makes it really difficult. And that's something that you find, unless you've got a huge supportive network, artistic friends and people that you can call on to sort of like commission them to do stuff. But then you've got to pay them and all of those kinds of things. And if you're on a budget or whatever, that can be difficult. Even and getting the right people or the right work done for you, that's always really tough as well. Like just trying to figure out those ins and outs of how to do that. At least, for me. So in the end, I just was like, well, I could go and, I guess, find people, or I could just learn it all myself and just do it. And so that's often the best way if you're independent or you're just a single producer, is just to choose something that you already do, and sort of create a brand that's sort of based on that. So that's how the Blight of Gods brand came about, is that I was already kind of doing these characters and learning ZBrush and kind of getting all that going. And in fact, it started from just an illustration, a painting that I'd done of two characters sort of fighting, and that was two ghoul characters, which are in the brand. And that just spawned ideas about a world and where they came from and all that kind of stuff. And it just all kind of built from there. And, that's often the way it will start, is not really thinking about like a grand idea or a grand design, just a very simple thing that you begin with, and then after that everything kind of fits together. Even if you're not sculpting like this, or you're just kit bashing or whatever with miniatures, you might start out with an idea and start kit bashing this thing, and then it grows into a story, or you might start using it in role play, or those kind of campaigns, or on the tabletop, and it just sort of starts to have a life of its own. And we have, everyone that's been in the hobby or done miniature stuff has a story like that of characters that have been with them since the beginning, or characters that you keep coming back to that you can't help but, model up new versions of, or have that be part of your army or your, role play system, or whatever you're doing. No matter what the genre is, you just end up doing this same character over and over again. And, a lot of us have that. And so that can be the beginnings, many brands and many sort of independent, projects have just started from that simple thing of just playing with your mates and coming up with an idea for something, and it just grows and grows and grows. And so, yeah, that's kind of how this brand kind of came about. And so now, down the track, I was, bored at work one day, and I'd always wanted to have some kind of game or something for the brand, right? And that was just something that I definitely wanted. And so I was always thinking about it, but I didn't really know exactly what. And I've always loved card games, always loved that stuff. I've been, with Games Workshop hobby since I was, 7 or 8 years old. And, and then cards as well. I like back in those days, back in those early days of late 80s, early 90s, card games were like collectible cards and all that stuff were massive. And that's the beginnings of Magic the Gathering and all that kind of stuff as well, right? So there's like a big pedigree there of well-known brands and things that began in that time, and which influenced everyone, myself included. And so I'd always had that, and I didn't really think at the start to do a card game, but it was this really boring night at work, as we've all had, when you're doing sort of menial jobs or whatever, and this idea came to me, well, why don't I just do a card game? And so I'd sit there and started thinking about it while I was working, and just thinking about ideas and what it could be, and all that kind of stuff, right? And by the end of the shift, I just got a little piece of paper and just jotted down some little points, just little bullet points quickly, waited to my break, and then I sort of had a look at that and wrote some more down on my break, and then just thought about it over the shift, you know what I mean? And just kept thinking about it, and and anything that I thought of, I just remembered and then wrote down at the end of the shift and put it all together. And then, after that shift and I had a look, I'd basically designed a card game, within about 5 hours of a boring shift with like no customers, no nothing. And then suddenly there was this game, and I was like, ooh, that's, I got the beginnings of the game here. And so I went home, I grabbed a bunch of playing cards, blacked them all out, put like stickers on them and wrote stuff on them and drew little drawings and stuff. And then just really, 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 ghetto style, real simple kind of, unpolished version of the game, and just built it out. And, I built a game that weekend. I played it and tested it out, and it worked, and I was like, oh, cool. And so that's how it started. Just, I was bored one day and just really wanted to, think what could I do with this time, effectively, and just thought of that, and it was like, that's exactly what I need. And it all just came together. So, how did I start it? Well, one of the principles when you're making games and stuff was you got to think about like your overarching goal, or, a set of guidelines that sort of govern what your game is. And so that's all I did. I just wrote down a couple of bullet points of, I want it to be this, I don't want that in it, and one of those main ones was I wanted a shared deck. I didn't want to have a deck building game. I didn't want to, have to do thousands of booster packs with like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cards. I wanted it to be a contained game where one person could afford, like, you don't have to have a lot of money to play it. It's just like, so that means like the person in your group that doesn't have a lot of cash, they don't even have to buy the game, just one person in the group. And that was coming from a love of, earlier game systems from the 80s. Just coinciding with this, I'd read an article, a blog article about really old school combat cards. That was like Games Workshop's like sort of first iteration of them, and the guy was talking about this in the article and talking about how wonderful they were, how wacky they were, and how not sort of money driven it was. It was just this wacky game that they'd made. And, I remember, you'd be on the bus with your mates and you'd be playing it. It was it wasn't even very well balanced. It was just, this wacky stuff with all of their miniatures on the cards, and you played this game. And that was really cool, right? And I remember that with such fond memories, very different to the one that's now. It wasn't really like the one that exists now, but yeah, it was just that cool memory. And I remember that of being a kid and just really enjoying it. And I wanted to bring some of that into my brand so that, a new person coming in can get a little taste or a feeling of that old school 80s vibe of just playing a game that's not like designed to take all your money and all that kind of stuff, not designed to sort of like, keep you out of it if you don't have enough money to do it, all that kind of thing. I wanted an inclusive thing that just felt cool for everyone that was playing it. And so that was one of those principles, and that helped drive the initial design very, very fast. Another thing that I used was using a structure that is, Creative Commons, something that's not copyrightable, right? So playing cards and that kind of thing, poker, those kind of games, very old games, they have a particular balance and a structure to them that works. And so I would analyze that and break that down and figure out why that was working, and use that as a beginning structural element just to help me understand like how many cards should be in a faction or in a set or whatever, right? And just sort of replaced, so the number cards or the face cards with my own cards, and then slowly but surely figure out why that's why that's balanced. And that's just where it all began, right? This is how it all started. It was just me mucking about and really just thinking about how I could create something cool. And and then soon after that, I think the game it took like 5 months, and I had almost the final version of what the game would be. I took like 3 months off work, and I just went hard at it. I sculpted like, I don't know, close to 50 characters in like 3 months. It was like a whirlwind ride of like doing this type of sculpture. So luckily for me, I chose a good thing. If you have a look on the website, you'll see it's all portraiture. So most of the characters don't have their full bodies fleshed out. It's mostly just the upper part of them that's done, and then some are, but some aren't. And so for the card game to get it done, get the art done, because that's really the hard bit. If you're thinking you're doing something like this, the biggest hurdle isn't the mechanics, isn't any of that. It's the art that's on the card. That is hands down the hardest part of making something like this. If you don't have the skills, or you're having hundreds and hundreds of cards, that's going to take you a very, very long time, like a huge amount of time. And you can be at it for forever if you allow it to get away from you. So I made sure that I kept the game tight, the first one anyway. So there's a lot of mechanics and things that I wanted to add in that I couldn't. But I kept it tight, and took that time off, which did cost. It was a difficult time, but I still got it done. And then coming out the back of that, I was like, wow, okay, I've got all the art done. It took a hard slog, but I got it done, and that allowed me then to basically complete the game in under a year. And then the second year, so it's always, so in design they talk about that 80-20 thing, and it's always the last like 10%, like 90% is easy to get to, and the last 10% takes twice as long as the rest, right? And like the whole other 90%, and that's very, very true. So once I'd got it to that almost polished state where it was basically done, that last bit of just like playtesting, and what I would find is that one of the great things to do is to leave it alone for a while. So I would just not play it for months and months and just leave it, and then come back to it and take a look with fresh eyes, because that's what you really need. Because so much of your designing, you're in this world, and you're just mucking around, and you can't see whether the game's any good. And it took me a long time to figure out I actually enjoyed playing it. Like for the first part, I didn't even know if I really liked the game that much. It worked, it was functional, and it played, but did I actually enjoy playing it? Like was I enjoying myself? Because that's a big thing. Like, if you're not enjoying yourself doing it, then why are you making it? You know what I mean? Because chances are, if it's a small project, you're going to be the biggest fan of that work, right? It's going to take a long time for other people to come across it and to enjoy it and all that stuff. You're probably going to be, you know, playing it the most out of anyone. And so, do you actually like the thing that you made? And that's a huge question, right? So yeah, for a long time I didn't know, because I was always focused on mechanics and like how everything worked and all this type of stuff. I really hadn't sat back and just enjoyed actually playing it. And so it took ages and ages to get to that point. But once I'd left it alone for a while and I could come back to it with fresh eyes, like I realized I actually really did like it. It was playing really well. I actually really enjoyed it. And I was like, okay, so I do have something here, you know. And my friends, the people that were helping me, you know, play test it and so on, you know, they wouldn't have kept doing it and kept helping me if they thought it was, you know, crap or whatever. And so they tended to like it as well, you know, or at least happy to sit down and play it in its state that it was in. And so that was also a motivating factor that, okay, so I've at least got something where it keeps people's attention, you know. How far can we push this? And so that first deck is really about just getting those basics down and getting it working. And now coming into this second deck, as now that I released that almost 2 years ago now, pre-COVID. And now then COVID kind of got in the way and all that kind of stuff. And so now I'm back doing this next deck. And now I've got all the additional kind of, I guess, game mechanics and things that I really wanted to also put in the game. Now that's in this second deck that I'm building and adding so much to the game system. So that's really, really fun, right? So yeah, just a bit of backstory there on how all this sort of stuff in a loose, quick way of how it all came together. There's obviously a lot more to that story, but I don't want to waffle on forever on that. We can come back to that topic later. But yeah, so, you know, coming forward to this time, we're now into the second deck, and I did a little hobby chat, you know, my little talks during the week a couple of weeks ago on, I guess, hobby depression and like getting down on a project, and I talked about me finishing that first deck and coming out of it feeling pretty empty. And you know, if you're interested in that topic, go have a listen. It's an interesting one for sure, and because it happens, you know, you invest so much of yourself in a project, and then when you come out the other end, you kind of are a bit lost, you know, a little bit like kind of, oh, what do I do now? And that was kind of what happened to me. And I'd never felt that before inside of my creative world. You know, the hobby and my art and everything is like a safe space, and to have that infiltrate that space was really, really new for me. I'd never experienced that. And so that was something that really took a while for me to really come out of, and it's only now. And so part of that process, now that I'm happy to be sculpting again and getting back into it, and part of that was actually getting back into Warhammer and doing all this, and you know, and getting really active with that. That's really helped me break out of that funk. And now I'm happy to sculpt again. And so part of all of that is also doing this vlog. So it gives me a chance to sort of air my thoughts and keep myself motivated and give me something to be held accountable to. I think that if you're also struggling with this type of thing and you're coming across this video and you're hearing me waffle on about something you know nothing, like some crazy brand you don't know, but you're just hearing me speak, but you know, you might have suffered through something you might know about is suffering through this type of thing too. And so one of the things that I can suggest is, yeah, doing something that keeps you accountable. So that's, for me, I decided that I really did need to have something that made me do something every week, and that's doing a vlog like this, so that I can, you know, one, yeah, air my thoughts, and two, obviously also promote the brand and keep myself going and give me a reason to keep putting content out there, because it can be very daunting. The you know, the internet these days is just saturated with projects. There's so much stuff, and you know, the amount of like 3D printable stuff that's out there and all the rest is just insane. You know, Kickstarter is just flush with campaigns. Patreon is just overloaded with products and you know, and all kinds of stuff there, which is just, you know, it's great, but it's also, as an artist getting into these things, it can feel impossible to get yourself motivated and going, you know, because you think, oh, well, there's already so much, like most of that stuff is so heavily underpriced. It feels like impossible to even compete with a lot of those things, right? So I guess my thing was not to compete with it, is just to create, something that's standalone that doesn't really compete with those companies, because I just could never keep up with that. I couldn't offer a Patreon that does like 50 models in a month for $10. That's just insane. Some of those companies that are offering that's like, impossible. I still don't, I've talked about this before, I still have no idea how those companies are making any money. It doesn't make any sense to me, because you got to pay all those sculptors. You can see, like, you're watching the process right now. This is what they do. They're in this program, ZBrush, or in a CAD program, and they're sculpting all this stuff out. You can see I'm using a stylus and tablet. There's no like special buttons I'm pushing to make this form. I've got to sculpt that out. I've got to design it. I've got to move everything around. There's no like tricks here. This is like real sculpting, even though it's on a computer. If this was clay, it'd be the same thing. I'd be using tools to carve out. See that? Carve and smooth. I'd be doing all that kind of stuff just manually. I'm still doing it manually. I'm using my hand. I'm having to, do all those movements. And so you got to pay someone for all of that. That's like, and if you're going off drawings, then you got to pay an illustrator to draw it as well. So it's a very curious thing. I'm not really sure how those companies are doing it, but yeah, it's something that I could never compete with. Like, that's just too difficult. So I kind of went the other way. I went, okay, well, what can I do that's like adjacent, something that people in this hobby would still love, but doesn't compete with those companies? Because that's something that you should consider if you're thinking about this stuff, is to think about what can you do that's not necessarily the same. Like, because if you just do like another Patreon for, 3D printable characters, the chances of that succeeding is extremely small. Unless you've got a big following. If you've built up a huge following on social media and you've got enough there to get you going, then great, it'll work. But if you don't, that's sort of like a real, I guess, tricky thing, tricky thing to get going and have work. And so, yeah, it's definitely something to consider if you're going down this road. But, at the end, if you're even doing this type of thing or you're interested in it, chances are like it's part of who you are, so you're going to end up doing it anyway. So some of those things don't matter, I guess, as much. If it's something you love, then you'll just do it regardless of whether it succeeds or not. And that's kind of where I'm at. Like I need to do this stuff, so like it keeps me sane. So whether it ends up finding an audience or not is kind of, a secondary, although I would love it to. But the main point is I must, it's like that muse that I'm a slave to the muse. It's just something that I've always loved doing. And, and it's wonderful that I get to live in a time period where I get to use digital, because originally, when you're doing it with clay, it just takes so much longer. Like, these forms that I'm building and carving out would take way, way longer. And the fact that I've got symmetry, see here, both sides are being done at once. God, if you got to do this by hand, what you would do back in the day, what you would do when you're sculpting like large scale stuff, let's say like for movies or whatever, so I've got some experience in that, you put a mirror, okay, on this side. So you sculpt out one side, let's say, you're sculpting, let's say this left side here, and then you would put the model like this and have a mirror here, like that, and then you would then sculpt the other and copy the mirror image of what you're seeing, and then to get it to match, and then do the other side as well and do the same thing to do all that stuff. So that's like the real old school way of, like, getting the detail to match up and get the same thicknesses and all the rest. That's like a crazy thing, right? And these days now, you've just got these beautiful tools. I mean, it's still hard. It's still sculpting. You've got to know what you're doing and know how to create forms that are pleasing and all of that stuff. But, I mean, it's amazingly fast, because I only really have to sculpt one half of the model. I mean, in that way, there's a bit of cheating there, because you're not having to do the whole thing. But you still need to be capable and understand, like, how to do it, like how to create those forms correctly. And get pleasing shapes. So there's a lot of anatomy knowledge, a lot of, all that type of stuff that comes into it that you really need to think about as you're sculpting and getting these forms down. And, and then also the scale. So You'll notice that like when you're doing miniatures and stuff, when you look at miniatures, their forms are much more simplified, and so there's a reason for that, because you can't, I guess, those shapes, like what I'm doing now, some of this small stuff doesn't work so well on that scale, and it's one of those things you got to take into account. But I've always my goal isn't to create stuff quite as small as that, so it's a little bit on a larger scale. Even for my board game and stuff, the miniatures are, or I guess they're more like busts, but the pieces are a lot larger, and that means that I can get all this sculptural detail in. Because my background, I guess, I started out, learning with the movies and stuff, and doing a little bit of movie work, and so that type of sculpting, when you see that, it's very different to miniature sculpting. You're not putting all of this like fine textures and all of that mark making in. That's not a consideration when you're doing miniatures, because it will just never come out. It'll never read. The 3D printers or whatever you're doing it on can't even read that stuff. That's like thousandths of a micron high. That's literally almost, the printer can hardly even see half of this, so you wouldn't even bother with it. But for me, I've got to use two applications here, one of those tricks, right? So I want to use this for imagery as well, for like color images and so on. So I want that texture there so I can paint it up and have it look cool for an image. I mean, you could use photo textures as well, but I like the sculptural surface to be there. It also then helps keep your skills up for this type of thing. So it's more about like thinking about what's important, and that's part of that process. Like I said, when you're designing a game, you're putting those principles down. Well, that also means with the art and the pieces that you're going to create, how much, like, what's important, what do you want to say, what do you want to put out there, and then go with that, and don't sort of deviate, I guess. Plenty of times I've gone like, no, am I doing the right thing? Should I be even bothering with all of this? You know what I mean? Should I just do miniatures and do simpler stuff and not worry about all of this extra? Because there's a lot of work, right, to put all these kinds of details in. It takes forever. But then again, you have to go with also what you're naturally inclined to do, so what your abilities kind of go towards. And I've always been obsessed with details, and so for me it makes perfect sense to do things that are more detail focused, or more fine detail orientated, I guess, because my mind just goes towards that, and I love just noodling away at these type of things. It's just very relaxing, right? So that's kind of where I'm at. So I just went, okay, well, I could be doing a bunch of 32 mil figures or whatever, but I wouldn't enjoy it as much as then. I'd always want to be going in and noodling away at all this stuff. And so they're those kind of considerations, I guess, in making anything that you do, right? So yeah, let's see how long I've been going. Geez, I've probably been waffling on for quite a while. So yeah, I thought I'd just bring you into this process. I guess I'm going to continue this series, and just do it each week and bring you in. So sometimes it'll be sculpting, sometimes it'll be maybe painting 3D prints or prototypes. Maybe it'll be doing a bit of my card game, or like play testing, or I don't know yet. But I figure I'll just bring you along this journey and fill you in and let you see the process of how something is built. It might inspire you, might give you your own ideas to go out there and start creating worlds for yourself, and just basically expose people to what Blight of Gods is, because as I said, it's been around for about 7 years now, and I probably shouldn't pull my finger out and try to show people what this world is, and don't just keep it to myself and be the only fan of of my work. That's one of those things as an artist. You gotta share your work eventually. You can't just hoard it like a big treasure pile, like a dragon. You gotta share it around. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Please hit that like button, subscribe button if you have, and I guess I'll catch you on the next one.